Hetty Green, however, was perfectly calm. Because she tracked every penny, she knew exactly how much cash she had. She had no debt. While others were begging for loans, Hetty was the one with the money. She didn't just survive the crash, she thrived during it, buying up assets for pennies on the dollar because she was the only one who actually knew where her money was. Hetty's secret wasn't just that she saved money. It was that she was her own bookkeeper. She refused to let a single leak exist in her financial bucket. She knew that a penny saved in 1873 was a seed that would grow into a dollar by 1880. To her, there was no such thing as a small expense. The myth of the mental budget. Most people today believe a dangerous myth. They believe they have a mental budget that works just fine. You might tell yourself, I know roughly what my rent is, I know what my car payment is, and I'm pretty sure I spend about $400 on groceries. The problem is that our brains are terrible at mental math when emotions are involved. We remember the times we were good and skip the expensive lunch, but we conveniently forget the 3 times we ordered takeout because we were too tired to cook. We remember the $20 we put into savings, but we ignore the $15 convenience fee we paid to get concert tickets. People believe they don't need to track their spending because they think tracking is for people who are struggling. They think, I make 6 figures, I shouldn't have to worry about the price of a latte. But this is exactly how lifestyle creep happens. As your income grows, your untracked spending grows even faster. You aren't getting richer, you are just building a bigger bucket with bigger holes in the bottom. The truth is that the more money you make, the more important it is to track it. If you have a small bucket, a small leak is easy to spot. If you have a massive reservoir, a leak can drain thousands of dollars before you even notice the water level has dropped. Sarah Jenkins lived deep inside this myth. On a Tuesday night in Chicago, she sat at her cluttered kitchen island with a stack of bank statements and a yellow highlighter. Her daughter Maya was asleep upstairs, and the house was finally quiet. For months, Sarah had been avoiding this. She felt like a fake. She had a high-level job and a nice title, but she was terrified of looking at the numbers. She and her husband Dave had a combined income that should have made them feel wealthy. Instead, they felt like they were constantly underwater. Sarah started highlighting every charge that wasn't a need. $12 for a streaming service they hadn't used in 6 months. $45 for a fitness app Dave signed up for in January and forgot about. $68 for a style box subscription that sent her clothes she usually returned anyway. Then she hit the big one. She added up all the charges from food delivery apps. Between the service fees, the delivery fees, the tips, and the inflated menu prices, she and Dave had spent $1,100 on DoorDash in a single month. Sarah felt a physical weight in her chest. That $1,100 was more than Maya's preschool tuition. It was money that could have wiped out one of their credit cards in a few months. But because it happened in small, $40 increments, it had been invisible. It was a mental budget failure. The fog was finally lifting, and even though the view was ugly, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years: control. She wasn't a victim of bad luck. She was just a person with a leaky bucket, and for the first time she knew exactly where the holes were. The 3-day receipt audit. To stop the leaks, you have to see them in real time. Most people try to start a budget by looking at a spreadsheet once a month. This is like trying to lose weight by stepping on a scale once a month without ever looking at what you eat. To change your life, you have to look at the calories of your spending as they happen. A simple way to start is the 3-day receipt audit. For the next 3 days, you must record every single transaction you make. It doesn't matter if it is a $2 candy bar or a $2,000 rent payment. Ask for a physical receipt for everything. If you buy something online, take a screenshot of the confirmation page. Carry a small notebook or use a simple note app on your phone. At the end of each day, write down the total and what it was for. The goal isn't to judge yourself. The goal is to build the Hetty Green muscle. You are training your brain to notice when money leaves your hand. When you have to ask for a receipt and write down gas station snack minus $6.50, you break the autopilot mode that leads to overspending. You start to see that $6.50 not as a tiny amount, but as a unit of your time. If you earn $20 an hour, that snack cost you about 20 minutes of your life. Is it worth 20 minutes of work? Sometimes the answer is yes, but often it is no. The 50-30-20th rule with a twist. Once you see where the money is going, you need a framework to decide where it should go. A popular method is the 50-30-20th rule. In a perfect world, it looks like this. 50% for needs: rent, groceries, utilities, insurance, and basic transportation. 30% for wants: dining out, hobbies, Netflix, and that extra pair of shoes. 20% for savings and debt repayment, building your moat and killing your loans. However, if you are reading this book, you might be in a financial fire situation. If you have high-interest credit card debt, the standard 30% for wants is a luxury you can't afford right now. You need a modified blueprint. Think of your money like a ship taking on water. You don't spend 30% of your time painting the deck while the hull is leaking. You spend 90% of your time plugging the hole. For a season, your wants category should be slashed to the absolute minimum, maybe 10%, so you can pour 40% into your debt and savings. This isn't about being poor forever. It is about being intense for a short time so you can be free for the rest of your life. Backward-looking versus forward-looking. There are two ways to look at your money. Most people only look backward. They check their bank app at the end of the week and say, "Oh wow, I spent a lot of money." This is like watching a replay of a game you already lost. A fiscal architect looks forward. You decide where the money goes before the month starts. This is the difference between a spending log and a budget. Backward-looking: I spent $500 on groceries last month. I guess that's just what it costs. Forward-looking: I have $400 for groceries this month. When I hit $350, I'm eating pasta and beans from the pantry for the last 4 days. When Sarah and Dave sat down for their next money date, they didn't just highlight old mistakes. They drew a line in the sand. They decided that for the next 30 days, their food category was a fixed number. If they wanted to order pizza on a Friday night, they had to look at their remaining balance. If there was only $20 left, they didn't order the pizza. This shift changed the atmosphere in their home. Instead of Sarah feeling guilty about a purchase and hiding the receipt, they were working together toward a goal. They were no longer financial firefighters reacting to a crisis. They were building something. Identifying your specific leaks. Every person has a different leak profile. To fix your bucket, you have to be honest about where your own water is disappearing. Here are the 3 most common leaks that drain the modern middle-class income. 1. The convenience leak. This is the money we pay because we are busy. It's the $5 delivery fee, the $10 pre-cut fruit, and the $15 car wash because we don't want to use the hose at home. These aren't bad things, but when they are added together, they often cost more than a vacation. We are trading our future freedom for 10 minutes of current ease. 2. The status leak. This is the money we spend to make sure other people think we are doing well. It's the brand name clothes for our kids who will grow out of them in 3 months. It's the expensive car lease that makes the neighbors nod in approval. As Marcus Aurelius would say, we are paying a tax on our own vanity. 3. The ghost leak. These are the recurring subscriptions and memberships we no longer use. They are the most dangerous because they are automated. They don't require us to swipe a card, so our brains don't register them as spending. They are the silent vampires of the bank account. When you identify these leaks, don't try to fix them all in one day. Pick one. Cancel the streaming service you haven't watched in a month. Delete the food delivery app from your phone for 1 week. Experience what it feels like to keep that money in your bucket. The power of the ledger. There is a quiet peace that comes from knowing your numbers. When Hetty Green sat in her modest room and opened her daybook, she wasn't stressed. She wasn't worried about the panic outside her door or what the newspapers said about her. She knew exactly where she stood. Most of the anxiety we feel about money doesn't come from a lack of dollars. It comes from a lack of information. We are afraid to look because we suspect the news is bad. But the financial fog is always worse than the reality. Once you shine a light on the numbers, even if they are scary, you can start to fix them. Sarah Jenkins found this to be true. After 3 weeks of tracking every penny, she realized that they didn't actually have an income problem. They had a direction problem. Her $120,000 salary wasn't disappearing. She was throwing it away in small handfuls. One evening, Dave came home and saw the modified budget on the fridge. He looked at the debt paid column and saw a small number, $150. It wasn't $22,000, but it was a start. It was $150 that would have normally gone to DoorDash or a random Target run. Instead, it was gone forever, subtracted from their debt. "We actually did it," Dave said, leaning against the counter. "We did," Sarah replied. "And I didn't even miss the pizza." She realized that the luxury she thought she was buying with her convenience spending was a lie. The real luxury was the feeling of sitting at her kitchen island and not feeling a tightening in her chest. The real luxury was knowing that the bucket was still full. If you want to achieve lasting peace of mind, you have to start where Hetty Green started. You have to be the bookkeeper of your own life. You have to stop guessing and start knowing that the way to wealth isn't paved with gold, it is paved with information. As you move forward, keep your ledger close. Don't worry about what the world thinks of your small black dress or your cheap habits. The world is full of people in mansions who are one paycheck away from disaster. You are building something different. You are building a fortress, one tracked penny at a time. The fog is lifting. The leaks are being found. Now, it is time to decide what you actually need to fill the bucket back up. It's time to move from survival to strategy. It's time to look at the difference between a high standard of living and a high quality of life. 3. The Great Depression's Hidden Lessons. Use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. This was not just a catchy phrase in the early 1930s. It was a survival manual written in the hearts of millions. In the dusty kitchens of Oklahoma and the cramped apartments of New York City, people looked at a hole in a sock or a thinning loaf of bread and didn't see a trip to the store. They saw a puzzle to be solved. The year was 1932. The United States was in the grip of the Great Depression. 1 out of every 4 people had no job. There was no such thing as an online order or next-day delivery. If you didn't have the cash in your pocket, you didn't have the item. The financial fog we talked about in the first chapter wasn't a fog back then, it was a brick wall. Families who once enjoyed Sunday drives and new hats suddenly found themselves standing in bread lines. But something strange happened during those dark years. While the standard of living, the amount of stuff people owned, plummeted, many people discovered a new way to measure the quality of life. They learned that a home could be warm without expensive furniture, and a meal could be filling even if it came from a garden patch instead of a butcher shop. The flour sack revolution. One of the most famous examples of this era's grit was the story of the flour sack. In the 1930s, many mothers couldn't afford to buy fabric for their children's clothes. They noticed that the heavy cotton bags used to hold flour and chicken feed were actually made of decent material. They began bleaching the bags, cutting them up, and sewing them into shirts, dresses, and even underwear. The companies that sold the flour noticed what was happening. Instead of getting angry or ignoring it, they did something incredible. They started printing their flour sacks with beautiful patterns, polka dots, flowers, and bright colors. They even used ink that would wash off, so the brand name wouldn't show on a little girl's new dress. These women weren't just being cheap. They were practicing resourcefulness. They were looking at a waste product and seeing a wealth product. They were closing the leak in the bucket by refusing to let a single scrap of fabric go to waste. This wasn't about being poor, it was about being powerful in the face of a crisis. They realized that their ability to create was more valuable than their ability to consume. This era taught us a lesson we have mostly forgotten in our world of one-click buying. Your bank account does not define your dignity. The families who survived the Depression with their spirits intact were the ones who could distinguish between what they needed to stay alive and what they wanted to feel important. The Emperor's Practice. Long before the Great Depression, a man named Marcus Aurelius sat in a very different position of power. He was the Emperor of Rome. He had the keys to the greatest treasury in the world. He could have worn the finest silk, dyed in Tyrian purple, a color so expensive it was made from the crushed shells of thousands of sea snails. Instead, Marcus Aurelius practiced something he called premeditatio malorum, or the practice of poverty. Every once in a while, the most powerful man on earth would leave his palace. He would wear the roughest wool clothes he could find. He would sleep on a hard floor. He would eat the simplest porridge, the kind given to the poorest citizens. As he chewed the bland food and felt the chill of the floor, he would ask himself one question: is this what I was so afraid of? He realized that his fear of losing his wealth was actually making him a slave. By practicing being poor, he took away the power that money had over him. He realized that even if he lost the purple robe and the golden throne, he would still be Marcus. His character, his thoughts, and his peace of mind were things that a market crash or an invading army could never take away. This is the bridge between the 1930s and your life today. We often spend money because we are afraid of what will happen if we don't. We buy a new car because we're afraid people will think we're failing. We buy the latest phone because we're afraid of being left behind. We are living in a mental poverty, even when our houses are full of stuff. Sarah's Kitchen Challenge. Back in Chicago, Sarah Jenkins was starting to feel that same kind of fear, but it was shifting into something else. After finishing her great audit and seeing that $1,100 DoorDash bill, she felt a mix of anger and energy. She decided to try her own version of the 1930s make-do philosophy. She called it the no-spend week. The rules were simple: no grocery store trips, no Target runs, and absolutely no takeout. They would live only on what was already in their pantry and freezer. On Tuesday night, the old Sarah would have been on her phone, scrolling through a delivery app, because she was too tired to think. Dave, her husband, was already suggesting a pizza. The debt monster was whispering that one $30 pizza wouldn't change their $22,000 debt. Wait, Sarah said, opening the pantry. She found a half box of spaghetti, a jar of sun-dried tomatoes they had bought for a party 6 months ago, and a tin of breadcrumbs. In the freezer, she found a bag of frozen spinach. She didn't just cook, she experimented. She made what she called pantry pasta. It wasn't a 5-star meal, but as they sat at the table, something felt different. Maya, their 3-year-old, loved the crunchy noodles with the breadcrumbs. Dave admitted it was better than the greasy pizza they usually ordered. For the first time in years, Sarah didn't feel like a financial firefighter trying to put out a blaze. She felt like an architect. By the end of that week, they hadn't just saved $150 on groceries and takeout. They had proved to themselves that they were not dependent on the convenience machine. They had reclaimed their kitchen, their time, and their confidence. The utility per dollar metric. The lesson Sarah learned is what we call utility per dollar. This is a simple way to look at everything you buy. Instead of asking, how much does this cost, you ask, how much life will this give me for every dollar I spend? Think about a $5 cup of coffee. You drink it in 10 minutes. The utility is very high for a moment, but it vanishes quickly. Now, think about a $15 headlamp you use every night to read to your child. If you use it for 3 years, that's 1,095 uses. Each use costs you about 1 penny. That is incredible utility. The people of the Great Depression were masters of this math. They didn't buy things that broke. They bought things that could be repaired. They understood the boots theory. If you buy a $30 pair of boots that falls apart in 6 months, you have to buy another pair. In 10 years, you've spent $600 on boots and your feet were always wet. But if you save up and buy a $100 pair of high-quality boots that lasts 10 years, you've saved $500 and your feet stay dry. Frugality is not about buying the cheapest thing. It is about buying the thing that costs the least over time. To do this, you have to move past the hedonic treadmill. This is a fancy way of saying that humans get used to new things very fast. When you get a raise, you feel happy for a month. Then you buy a bigger house to match the raise. Suddenly, you aren't any happier than you were before, but now you have more bills. You are running faster and faster, but you aren't moving forward. The needs, wants, and lusts pyramid. To stop the treadmill, you need a clear way to categorize your spending. During the make do and mend era, this happened naturally because there was no money. Today, we have to do it on purpose. Imagine a pyramid with 3 levels. The base needs. These are the things that keep you safe and healthy. Water, basic food, a roof over your head, and the tools you need for work. In the 1930s, this was a flour sack dress. Today, it might be a reliable used car. The middle, wants. These are things that make life more pleasant, but aren't required. A streaming service, a nice dinner out once a month, or a hobby. These are fine, but they must be planned for. The peak, lusts. These are things we buy primarily for the ego. The designer handbag, the car that is too much for our commute, or the $12 cocktail that we only bought because the place looked cool on social media. The financial fog happens when we treat our lusts like needs. When Sarah realized that DoorDash was a lust disguised as a time saver, she was able to move it from the base of her pyramid to the trash can. The goal isn't to live at the bottom of the pyramid forever. The goal is to make sure the base is solid so that the top doesn't crush you. Marcus Aurelius was at the very top of the pyramid, but he spent his time focusing on the base. That is how he stayed calm while his empire was at war. Finding the hidden gold. When you start looking at your life through the lens of the Great Depression, you start finding money in places you never looked. You find it in the subscription you forgot to cancel. You find it in the leftovers you used to throw away. You find it in the library card that replaces a $20 a month book habit. Every time you make do, you are paying yourself. If you choose to fix a leaky faucet yourself for $5 in parts instead of calling a plumber for $200, you didn't just save $195. You earned it. And because that money isn't taxed, it's actually worth more than the money you earn at your job. This is where the silent compounder from Chapter 1 starts to get loud. If Sarah and Dave save $150 every week by being resourceful, that's $7,800 a year. If they put that money toward their $22,000 credit card debt, they aren't just paying off the balance. They are stopping the 24% interest from eating their future. The $7,800 they found in their pantry becomes tens of thousands of dollars over the next few years. All because they decided to cook some pasta instead of clicking an app. The historical echo. Today, we aren't in the Great Depression. Our grocery stores are overflowing, and we can buy anything in the world with a thumbprint. But in many ways, we are thinner than the people of 1932. We have less financial muscle. Most people today couldn't sew a button or cook a meal without a recipe and a pre-packaged kit. We have traded our resourcefulness for convenience, and the price of that convenience is our freedom. We are financial firefighters because we have forgotten how to build a fireproof house. The hidden lesson of the 1930s is that wealth is not found in what you earn, but in how little you need to be happy. When you realize that you can make do and mend, you stop being a victim of the economy. You become the owner of your own life. You don't need a national crisis to start practicing this. You don't need to wait for the panic of 1819 or the crash of 1929 to hit your front door. You can start tonight. Look at your bucket. Find one leak, one less disguised as a need, and plug it. The women who wore flour sack dresses weren't just making clothes. They were making a statement. They were saying, I am in charge of my family's future, no matter what the banks say. When you choose to be frugal, you are making that same statement. You are building a fortress that no market crash can knock down. As we move into the next chapter, we will take this make-do energy and turn it into a system. We'll look at how to rewire your brain so that saving money feels even better than spending it. We are going to turn that frugal dopamine into a permanent part of your DNA. The standard of living might go up or down, but from here on out, your quality of life is going to be under your control. The flour sacks are gone, but the spirit of the people who wore them is exactly what you need to build your blueprint. 4. Rewiring your spending DNA. From high above the cobblestone streets of 1726 Philadelphia, you would see a city buzzing with the energy of a new world. Ships from Europe are unloading crates of fine lace, tea, and expensive furniture. In the market squares, people are showing off their latest coats and silver shoe buckles. They want to look like they have already made it, even if their pockets are empty. If you watch closely, you can see the same pattern of human behavior that exists today. People work hard all day, feel the weight of their stress, and try to cure that weight by buying things they do not need. In the middle of this busy town, a 20-year-old man named Benjamin Franklin sat in a small room. He was a printer's apprentice, which meant his hands were always stained with black ink, and his back often ached from leaning over heavy metal type. He was brilliant, but he was also a mess. He spent more than he earned. He was disorganized. He had a habit of saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. Most people in his position would have just accepted these flaws as part of who they were. They would have continued to spend their coins on beer and fancy clothes, hoping that someday things would just get better. Franklin was different. He realized that his life was not being ruined by big, dramatic disasters. It was being drained away by small, daily habits. He saw that his spending and his lack of discipline were like tiny holes in the bottom of a bucket. No matter how much water he poured into the top, no matter how hard he worked, the bucket would always be empty by morning. He decided he would not be a victim of his own nature. He set out on a bold experiment to rewire his own brain. He did not call it that, of course, but that is exactly what he did. The Little Book of Secrets. Franklin knew that just wishing to be better was a waste of time. He had tried that before. He would wake up and tell himself, "Today I will be frugal," only to find himself buying a round of drinks for friends by sunset. He realized that human beings are not driven by logic. We are driven by habits. To change his life, he had to change his spending DNA. He bought a small notebook and drew a grid. Across the top, he listed 7 days of the week. Down the side, he listed 13 virtues, the habits he wanted to master. He focused heavily on 2 that are the foundation of all wealth: industry and frugality. For Franklin, frugality had a very simple definition. He wrote it down so he would never forget: make no expense but to do good to others or yourself, i.e., waste nothing. He didn't just write this once and hope for the best. He carried that little book in his pocket every single day. Every evening before he went to sleep, he would look at his day. If he had wasted money on something he didn't need, or if he had been lazy when he should have been working, he would take his pen and put a heavy black spot in the square for that day. Imagine the feeling of that pen hitting the paper. It was a physical reminder of a failure. It was a visual feedback loop. At first, Franklin's book was covered in black spots. He was shocked at how often he slipped up. He realized that he wasn't spending money because he needed things. He was spending money because it was his default setting. He was reacting to the world around him, instead of acting on his own plan. He treated this like a game. His goal was to go a full week without a single black spot in the frugality row. He struggled for years. He specifically noted that order, keeping his things and his finances in a specific place, was his hardest battle. But over time, something strange happened. The spots started to disappear. Because he knew he had to face that book at 9 p.m., he started making different choices at 2 p.m. This is the silent compounder in action. A single saved coin doesn't make you rich today. But the habit of saving that coin changes the way your brain works. Franklin wasn't just saving money, he was building a version of himself that was capable of holding onto wealth. By the time he was a wealthy old man, he credited that little book of black spots for everything he owned. He proved that you can't just think your way into a new life. You have to track your way there. The science of the click. We live in a world that Benjamin Franklin wouldn't recognize, but our brains are exactly the same as his. We have the same dopamine loops that he struggled with at the Philadelphia market. Today, the market is in your pocket. It is on your phone, available 24 hours a day. When you feel stressed, bored, or lonely, your brain looks for a quick hit of feel-good chemicals. This is called dopamine. In the past, you might have had to walk to a store to get that hit. Now, you can just click a button. The click actually feels better than the product itself. Have you ever ordered something online, felt a rush of excitement, and then felt completely bored by the item once it actually arrived 2 days later? That is a dopamine loop. You weren't buying a scarf or a gadget, you were buying a temporary escape from your life. This is where your spending DNA gets tangled. Your brain starts to associate stress with spending. I had a hard day at work, so I deserve this new pair of shoes. The kids are screaming, so I'm going to order expensive takeout. This is exactly what was happening to Sarah Jenkins. As a marketing manager in Chicago, her life was a series of high-pressure meetings and deadlines. By the time she got on the L train to go home, her brain was searching for a reward. She would scroll through shopping apps on her phone, and before she even reached her stop, she had spent $50 on things she didn't even want an hour earlier. Sarah was living in the financial fog. She felt like she was working hard, but her bank account never seemed to grow. She was a financial firefighter, constantly putting out small fires of debt and tuition bills, never realizing that she was the one holding the match. The target test. A few weeks after Sarah started tracking her expenses, she found herself in the middle of a target. She had gone in for 2 things, milk and dish soap. This is a dangerous place for someone trying to rewire their spending DNA. The lights are bright, the aisles are wide, and everything is designed to make you feel like you need a little treat. Sarah walked past the dollar spot near the entrance. She saw a seasonal candle that smelled like pumpkin spice, and a soft gray scarf that looked perfect for the Chicago autumn. Her hand reached out almost on its own. She put them in the red plastic cart. She felt that familiar little rush, the dopamine hit. But then she stopped. She remembered Benjamin Franklin's little book. She thought about the black spots. She realized that if she bought these items, she would have to go home and tell her husband Dave that they were $25 further away from paying off their credit card debt. She looked at the candle. She asked herself a question she had learned from her reading. Is this sheep's hair dipped in snail blood? This was a trick from the Stoic philosophers. It means stripping away the status or the feeling of an item and looking at what it actually is. The candle was just wax in a glass jar. The scarf was just fabric she already had 5 versions of at home. Sarah did something she had never done before. She used the Franklin pause. She didn't buy the items, but she didn't just put them back immediately either. She walked to the back of the store, got the milk and the soap, and then stood there for 60 seconds. The old Sarah would have felt deprived. She would have felt like she was pinching pennies, because she wasn't successful enough. But the new Sarah felt something else, power. She realized that every time she said no to a small impulse, she was saying yes to her future freedom. She walked back to the front, placed the candle and the scarf on a random shelf, and walked to the checkout line with only the milk and soap. When she scanned her items, the total was $11. Usually, a trip to Target cost her $80. As she walked out into the parking lot, she felt a different kind of rush. It wasn't the dopamine of buying, it was the dopamine of winning. She had successfully rewired one tiny strand of her spending DNA. The trigger action reward loop. To change your habits, you have to understand how they are built. Every habit follows a 3-step loop. If you want to stop the leak in the bucket, you have to break this loop. The trigger, this is the spark. It is usually an emotion or a location. For Sarah, the trigger was the stress of her commute or the bright lights of a store. For you, it might be the ping of an email from a clothing brand or the feeling of being bored on a Tuesday night. The action, this is the behavior. You click add to cart. You drive through the fast food window. You scan your card without looking at the price. The reward, this is the hit of dopamine. You feel fancy for a moment. You feel full. You feel like you've rewarded yourself for a hard day. The problem is that the reward is fake. It lasts for 10 minutes, but the black spot on your bank statement lasts for a month. To rewire your DNA, you have to change the action while keeping the reward. When Sarah felt the trigger of stress, she started replacing the action of shopping with the action of checking her savings account. She would open her bank app and look at the $400 medical bill she had just paid off. Seeing that zero balance gave her a much bigger and more lasting reward than a pumpkin spice candle ever could. This is how you turn the silent compounder into your best friend. Every time you don't spend $20 and you put that money toward debt or savings, it begins to grow. It isn't just $20 anymore. Over 20 or 30 years, that single no at the Target checkout line can turn into hundreds of dollars in an investment account. You are literally buying your future self a day of freedom with every small choice you make today. The 48-hour wish list. One of the most powerful tools for rewiring your brain is the 48-hour wish list. This is a simple rule that creates friction between your impulse and your wallet. In the modern world, companies spend billions of dollars to make spending frictionless. They want you to be able to buy things with one click, or even with just your thumbprint. They want your money to leave your pocket before your brain has a chance to wake up. The 48-hour wish list fixes this. The rule is simple: you are allowed to want anything. You are just not allowed to buy it now. If you see a new gadget, a pair of jeans, or a piece of home decor that you absolutely must have, you write it down on a list. You can do this in a notebook or on your phone. You write the date and the price. Then you walk away. You must wait 48 hours before you can go back and buy it. Something magical happens during those 2 days. The dopamine hit wears off. The fog lifts. You start to look at the item with logic instead of emotion. You might realize that you already have something similar. You might realize that the $60 price tag is actually 4 hours of work, and you don't want to trade 4 hours of your life for that item. When Sarah started doing this, she found that she ended up deleting 90% of the items on her list after the 48 hours were up. She wasn't depriving herself. She was simply giving her brain time to catch up with her goals. The envelope of reality. While Franklin used a notebook, many people find that they need something more physical to rewire their spending. This is where the envelope system comes in. It is a very old method, but it works because it uses the psychology of pain. Studies show that when you pay for something with a credit card, the pain centers in your brain don't really light up. It doesn't feel like you are losing anything. It just feels like you are tapping a piece of plastic. But when you pay with physical cash, your brain feels the loss. You see the bills leaving your hand. You see the envelope getting thinner. Sarah and Dave decided to try this for their fun money and their groceries. They took out $500 in cash at the beginning of the month and put it in a white envelope. The first week was easy. They felt rich. But by the third week, the envelope was very thin. One night, Dave wanted to order a pizza. He went to the envelope and saw only 2 $10 bills left. He realized that if they bought the pizza, they wouldn't have enough for the fresh fruit and milk they needed for Maya's school lunches for the rest of the week. In the past, he would have just swiped a credit card and dealt with it later. But the physical reality of that empty envelope forced him to make a choice. He put the cash back, and he and Sarah made pantry pasta instead. They didn't just save $30 that night. They learned a lesson about limits. Frugality isn't about being poor, it's about understanding that every yes to something unimportant is a no to something that matters. By saying no to the pizza, they were saying yes to Maya's nutrition and their own peace of mind. The industry and frugality connection. Benjamin Franklin often spoke of industry and frugality as two sides of the same coin. He believed that if you are busy working on something you care about, you don't have time to waste money. Industry doesn't just mean your 9-to-5 job. It means having a purpose. When you have a clear goal, like Sarah and Dave's goal of being debt-free, your industry becomes the management of your life. Think about a garden. If you just leave a patch of dirt alone, weeds will grow. You don't have to do anything to get weeds, they just happen. Spending is like a weed. If you don't have a plan for your money, it will find its way out of your pocket. You will find yourself leaking money on subscriptions you don't use, convenience fees, and impulse buys. Rewiring your DNA means becoming a gardener. You have to be industrious about your savings. You have to look for the weeds every day. This might sound like hard work, but ask yourself, is it harder to spend 10 minutes a day tracking your money, or is it harder to lie awake at 2 a.m. wondering how you will pay your rent? The financial fog is a choice. You can choose to stay in the mist, or you can choose to be like Franklin and pick up the pen. The power of the small win. One of the most famous psychological studies is the marshmallow test from Stanford University. A child is put in a room with one marshmallow. They are told that if they can wait 15 minutes without eating it, they will get a second marshmallow. The children who can wait, those who can delay their gratification, tend to have much higher success rates later in life. They have higher net worths, better health, and lower stress. Most people think you are either born with this ability, or you aren't. But Franklin proved that this is a lie. You can train yourself to wait for the second marshmallow. Every time you use the 48-hour wish list, you are training your waiting muscle. Every time you put an item back on the shelf at Target, you are getting stronger. You are moving from being a financial firefighter who reacts to every spark to a fiscal architect who builds a solid foundation. Sarah Jenkins started to see this in her own life. After 2 months of tracking her black spots and using the envelope system, the fog began to lift. She wasn't just saving money, she was gaining time. She no longer spent her Saturday mornings feeling hungover from a Friday night shopping spree. She spent them at the park with Maya, feeling a deep sense of calm because she knew exactly where every dollar was going. She realized that the good life isn't something you buy. It is something you build. The challenge. Benjamin Franklin's experiment lasted for his entire life. He never reached perfection, and he admitted that in his autobiography. He still had flaws. He still made mistakes. But he was infinitely better off than if he had never tried at all. He once wrote, "A small leak will sink a great ship." You have a choice today. You can continue to let the small leaks drain your life, or you can start the process of rewiring your DNA. This isn't about numbers on a spreadsheet. It is about the person you see in the mirror. Are you the type of person who is controlled by the bright lights of a store and the ping of a notification? Or are you the type of person who has the industry and frugality to build a fortress around your family? The first step is the hardest, but it is also the simplest. You don't need a complex system. You just need to be honest. Tonight, before you go to sleep, I want you to look at your day. Did you waste anything? Did you buy something out of stress or boredom? Did you let a leak stay open in your bucket? If the answer is yes, don't beat yourself up. Just acknowledge it. Write it down. Face the black spot. The real question isn't whether you made a mistake today. The question is, are you brave enough to track it tomorrow? Your future freedom depends on your answer. Will you keep living in the fog, or will you start drawing your own grid and mastering your own virtues? The pen is in your hand. What will you write? 5. Frugality, the art of strategic sacrifice. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius sat in a drafty tent on the edge of the Danube River. Outside, the freezing wind howled across the dark water, and the sound of sharpening swords echoed through the camp. He was the most powerful man on earth. At his command, cities could be burned or built. He had access to the finest wines, the softest silks, and more gold than he could ever count. Yet, while his generals slept on feathered beds and draped themselves in heavy jewels, the emperor lay on a simple wooden plank covered by a thin wool sheet. He refused the imperial purple, a robe so expensive it cost more than a common soldier would earn in a lifetime. He knew that the moment he became a slave to his own comfort, he would lose the ability to lead his people. This was not a man who was poor. This was a man who chose strategic sacrifice. He understood a secret that most people today have forgotten. Frugality is not about what you lose, it is about what you protect. Marcus Aurelius saw his predecessors, like the Emperor Nero, ruin the empire because they couldn't stop spending. Nero built a golden house with ceilings that dropped flower petals and perfume on guests. He spent until the Roman treasury was empty, and then he began seizing the property of his own citizens to pay for his parties. Marcus Aurelius looked at that history and realized that a leader who cannot control his own desires will eventually be controlled by them. The snail blood filter. The imperial purple was the ultimate status symbol of the ancient world. It wasn't just a color. To make the dye for one single robe, workers had to crush thousands of tiny sea snails. The process was slow, difficult, and smelled terrible. Because it was so hard to make, only the ultra-wealthy could afford it. In Rome, wearing it told everyone, "I am better than you." It was the designer logo of 161 AD. Marcus Aurelius looked at his purple robe and didn't see power. He wrote in his personal journal that the robe was nothing more than sheep's hair dipped in the blood of a snail. He used this mental trick to strip away the magic of luxury. If you look at an object and see only its basic parts, it loses its power over your heart. Today, we are surrounded by our own versions of snail blood. We see a luxury SUV and think it represents success, but Marcus would tell us it is just metal, rubber, and glass that loses value every time the sun rises. We see a $1,200 smartphone and think it makes us modern, but it is just plastic and silicon that will be in a landfill in 4 years. Frugality is the art of applying this filter to everything you buy. It is the ability to look past the marketing, the shiny paint, and the social pressure to see the item for what it truly is. When you do this, you stop spending to impress and start saving to empower. You realize that you don't actually want the expensive item, you want the feeling people think the item gives them. Marcus Aurelius found that he could get that feeling of peace and strength for free just by choosing a simple life. The high cost of looking rich. There is a massive difference between being wealthy and looking wealthy. In fact, for many people, the more they try to look rich, the poorer they actually become. This is the status tax. It is the extra money you pay just so other people, most of whom you don't even like, will think you are doing well. Think about two neighbors. One drives a 10-year-old sedan that is paid for. The other drives a brand new luxury truck with a $900 monthly payment. On the surface, the neighbor in the truck looks successful. But if you look under the hood of their finances, the picture changes. The person in the sedan is investing that $900 every month. In 20 years, they will have a mountain of cash. The person in the truck will have a pile of rusted metal and a long history of interest payments. The status tax shows up in small ways too. It's the $15 cocktail at a fancy bar versus the $1 drink at home. It's the $100 designer t-shirt that covers your body, no better than a $10 one. When you pay the status tax, you are giving away your future freedom to buy a temporary ego boost. Sarah's dinner party dilemma. Sarah Jenkins sat at a long candlelit table in her friend's dining room, feeling a familiar sting in her chest. Her friends, a group of successful professionals from her marketing firm and Dave's school, were passing around a phone to look at photos. They were planning a couple's trip to the Amalfi Coast in Italy. "The villas are incredible," one friend said, showing a picture of a balcony overlooking a sparkling blue ocean. "It's only $4,000 per couple for the week. We should all book tonight." Sarah looked at Dave. 3 months ago, she would have laughed and reached for her credit card. She would have told herself, "We work hard, we deserve this." But tonight, she saw something different. She saw $4,000, the exact amount they needed to finish paying off their smallest credit card and finally start their starter emergency fund. She felt the FOMO, fear of missing out, pulling at her. She didn't want to be the boring friend who stayed home. She didn't want to admit that they were on a budget. For a moment, the pressure to belong felt heavier than the debt she was carrying. She felt ashamed that they couldn't just do it like everyone else. Dave reached under the table and squeezed her hand. "We're actually going to pass this time," he said quietly but firmly. "We've got some big goals for the house this year." The table went quiet for a second, then the conversation moved on. No one laughed. No one kicked them out of the group. In fact, one of the other couples looked almost relieved, as if they were also worried about the cost but didn't have the courage to say it. When they got home, the sting was still there, but it was being replaced by something new. "That was hard," Sarah admitted as they walked into their kitchen. "I know," Dave said. "But look at it this way. We aren't missing out on a trip. We are buying our freedom. Every dollar we didn't spend tonight is a dollar that works for us instead of the bank. We're not staying home to be miserable. We're staying home to be free." That weekend, instead of looking at Italian villas online, they pitched a tent in their small backyard. They made s'mores over a fire pit and looked at the stars with their daughter Maya. They spent a total of $20 on chocolate and graham crackers. Maya thought it was the best vacation of her life. Sarah realized that the quality of life she wanted didn't require an airplane ticket. It required her presence and a mind that wasn't worried about how to pay for the trip later. The Boots Theory of Economics. While Sarah was learning to cut back on luxuries, she also had to learn where not to be frugal. This is where many people get stuck. They think being frugal means buying the cheapest version of everything. But often, buying cheap is the most expensive thing you can do. There is a famous concept called the Boots Theory. It explains that a person who can afford a $50 pair of high-quality boots will have dry feet for 10 years. A person who can only afford $10 boots will have to replace them every season because they fall apart. After 10 years, the poor person has spent $100 on boots and still has wet feet, while the wealthy person spent $50 once and has stayed dry. Strategic sacrifice means knowing when to spend more to save more. It means buying the high-quality winter coat that lasts a decade instead of the fast fashion one that rips in a month. It means spending money on preventative car maintenance, so you don't have to spend $3,000 on a new engine later. It means buying healthy food now so you don't pay massive medical bills in 20 years. Frugality is not about being cheap. Cheap people focus on the price tag today. Frugal people focus on the cost over time. They ask, "How many times will I use this, and how much will this cost me to own for 5 years?" The utility per dollar metric. To master this, you need a new way to measure your purchases. Most people look at an item and ask, "Do I want this?" Instead, you should ask, "What is the utility per dollar?" Utility is just a fancy word for usefulness. If you buy a $1,000 sofa and sit on it every single day for 10 years, that is a high utility purchase. It costs you about 27 cents per day. If you buy a $100 dress that you wear once to a wedding and then leave in the closet, that is a low utility purchase. It cost you $100 per use. When you start thinking this way, your house starts to look different. You stop filling it with stuff that has a low utility and start investing in tools that have a high utility. You realize that a library card has an almost infinite utility per dollar, while a cable TV subscription has a very low one. The hedonic treadmill. The reason strategic sacrifice is so hard is because of something scientists call the hedonic treadmill. This is the human tendency to quickly get used to new, better things. When you get a raise, you feel great for a week. Then you buy a bigger house or a faster car. For a month, you are happy. But very soon, that new house becomes your normal. You stop noticing the extra space, but you definitely notice the higher mortgage payment. To get that happy feeling back, you feel like you need to buy something even bigger. You are running faster and faster, but you aren't actually getting any happier. You are just getting more tired and deeper in debt. Marcus Aurelius fought the treadmill by practicing poverty. Every once in a while, he would leave the palace and live like a commoner. He would eat simple porridge and sleep on the ground. He did this to remind himself that he didn't need the luxuries to be happy. He wanted to be able to look at his life and say, "Is this what I was so afraid of?" You can do this too. You can choose to have a no-spend week, where you only buy absolute essentials like groceries. You can choose to drive an older car, even if you can afford a new one. By intentionally choosing less, you break the power that more has over you. You prove to yourself that your happiness is built on your character and your relationships, not your possessions. Defining your own good life. The world is very loud about telling you what you should want. Advertisements tell you that you need a certain watch to be manly, or a certain cream to be beautiful. Social media tells you that your life is boring if you aren't constantly traveling or eating at 5-star restaurants. But Marcus Aurelius believed that very little is needed to make a happy life. He argued that most of what we think we need is actually just vanity. Strategic sacrifice is about deciding what your good life looks like, rather than letting a marketing department decide for you. If you love books, maybe you spend money on a beautiful home library, but drive a car that is 15 years old. If you love your family, maybe you sacrifice a high-stress, high-paying job for a lower-paying one that lets you be home for dinner every night. If you value peace of mind, you sacrifice the thrill of shopping for the calm of a growing bank account. This is the art of the sacrifice. It's not about cutting everything. It's about cutting the things that don't matter, so you can fund the things that do. It's about being a value-based spender. The power of enough. The most dangerous word in the English language is more. No matter how much you have, there will always be someone with more. If you play the game of more, you will eventually lose. The most powerful word is enough. When you decide what is enough for you, you become untouchable. If you are content with a simple home, a reliable car, and good food, the world has no power over you. You don't have to stay in a job you hate. You don't have to worry about a stock market crash. You don't have to feel jealous of your neighbor. Frugality is the tool that helps you find your enough. It's the process of stripping away the layers of want until you find the solid core of need. Once you find that core, you can start building a life that is truly yours. Breaking the purple robe syndrome. We all have our own purple robes. For some, it's a title at work. For others, it's a specific brand of clothing or a membership at an exclusive club. We tell ourselves these things are important, but they are often just the snail blood Marcus Aurelius warned us about. To live a frugal life, you have to be willing to be different. You have to be okay with people wondering why you haven't upgraded your kitchen or why you bring your lunch to work every day. You have to realize that their opinion of your lifestyle doesn't pay your bills. The people who matter won't care what you drive or what you wear. And the people who care about those things don't actually matter. When you stop living for the clatter of tongues, as Marcus called it, you gain a level of freedom that money can't buy. Practical steps for strategic sacrifice. You don't need to move into a tent or sleep on a wooden plank to follow this philosophy. You just need to start making small, intentional choices every day. Use the snail blood filter. The next time you are tempted to buy something expensive, stop. Break it down into its basic parts. If it's a car, see it as metal and plastic. If it's a designer bag, See it as leather and thread. Ask yourself, am I buying the object, or am I buying the story the company told me about the object? Calculate cost per use. Before any purchase over $50, do the math. How many times will you actually